Hello, beloved. Welcome back to another episode. I'm Monica Bermudez. I am your host for the podcast called Ascended Earth, the Transfiguration of the New Human. This episode is focused on the higher self, and there is a special channeled message toward the end of this episode. It is a collective higher self channeled message. How often do we find ourselves in doubts on whether it is the ego or the higher self speaking to you? I did for so long question it when I was starting out with my business, and I questioned and doubted whether if it was my ego or my higher self that was telling me about all of this. What I realized was that I didn't know myself as well as I thought I did. Honestly, nobody really knows you best than yourself. And despite somebody else saying to you, I know you better than you know yourself, they only know one fraction of you based on their own perception of you. In truth, you are far more vast in the unlimited amount that you hold within yourself of your own divinity. So there are many aspects to you that, haven't fully made their awareness, and some are. So in a way, this is an activation of those aspects within you. So let's elaborate on this a little further. The intention of this episode is to activate your conscious awareness, to dig deeper within your soul, and discern when it is your higher self speaking to you. When we refer to our higher self, it can have several names to it, also known as your inner voice, the God within, our intuition, the voice of our soul. It is a higher version of you. It's all embedded within you. We spend most of our time through many distractions around the world. And right now, there is a huge amount, an exponential increase because of the growing technology, which leads to a huge amount of like social media distraction as well. And I will be the first to admit that sometimes I fall into these traps of distractions as well. It happens to the best of us. But I become aware of it. And when I do, I apply my own will to discipline it within me to use social media for a certain amount of time or use for specific reasons. I use social media to keep my connections for my blissness, or in other words, my current business as a energy practitioner. I recently was at an event to mentor young children to focus on a topic similar to this about distractions on social media, which has been a growing epidemic amongst the young children, the youth. And it's so tempting with a lot of information that we're being, hit with from all sides. So, this happens to all of us, right? Where we're all being distracted from what's really inside of us. So, in one of those conversations that I was having during this mentoring, it was focused on intuition, which is really your higher self. And I discussed the different attributes of the ego versus the intuition. And during this conversation, someone asked, why even bother having the ego? Ah, such a great question. So I ask you, listener, why do we have the ego? Why not just always be the light? Have you ever asked yourself these questions? So before we incarnated into these bodies, our soul made an agreement, mapped out, and one of those agreements was to forget. But in that forgetfulness, it was mapped out to learn, to master, and fulfill certain things during this lifetime. And that agreement was made with your own divinity within you. And you could say God within you. There is no religion attached to these words. And so that agreement was also made with certain spiritual guides to help you along the way to maintain this alignment to the soul contract agreement for the duration of your life as a human on this planet. So this planet has always been known as a place where you can have the greatest learning and mastery of your own spiritual evolution. And as part of that agreement, we also have the ego because I do feel that it's part of our physical world and material presence. So during ascension, we are transforming the ego. Death to the ego is actually a transitional state. If we were always light, we would not advance as fast. If we were always darkness, we would not advance as much either. It's a balance of the two, a duality. The ego serves as a balancing point, and without darkness, we would not know the light. If without the light, we would not know darkness. There is a yin and a yang in everything, and it is one of the universal principles. What can make it confusing, though, with the ego and the higher self is that the voice sounds like your voice, the same voice. So in most cases, it's always your own voice that you hear. So which means that you have both within you in this physical form. You have the ego and the higher self. So if we were all light, we would have no need of this physical vehicle or temple to express ourselves. The ego has gone through some evolution. At some point, it served as a instinctual, based on instincts, survival mode to keep us safe. That is evolving now that we're transforming into this Homo luminous, as I discussed in a previous episode. The role of the ego is changing during these times of ascension with the higher potency of energies and frequencies that we are being bombarded with, which include the massive solar flares, bringing about a shift in our consciousness. And that's what 5D is all about too. It's all the same. In that shift, the ego is going through its death. The ego is associated to how we identify ourselves in this world, in our relationships, in the work that we do, in our financial status, etc. And the more that we study ourselves and get to know ourselves, the more the ego goes through a death or transitional state of change. There is an alchemical process, and the ego simply merges to the higher self, changing from serving itself to only to being of service to others and the collective. So this is not to be confused with self-love and self-care because these are not selfish acts. In order to continue to express ourselves in our physical body, there are times the body will require rest and breaks to recuperate. And the body will tell you when that's the case, right? In the cases that we go through certain cycles of feeling sick, for instance, and not really taking a break when we ought to, when we're feeling so exhausted. So in a way, the body just forces you that way to get that rest. It is like in old ways of thinking that we had to sacrifice ourselves like martyrs. That is an old pattern that just needs to be dissolved within our subconscious patterning, especially for light workers and star seeds, because we always feel that we always want to be giving and giving to others, and we forget to rest and give ourselves a break as well. And that is the act of self-care. So make sure you recharge yourself when needed. Right now, we are going through massive quantum energy upgrades in our physical body and light body. The physical body, which has had so much of the damaged cells and the density of the environment, of the trauma that has been gathered and collected through our subconscious, through our ancestry, through our past lives, is beginning to be cleansed, purged, released. In order for that to be released, we may feel certain signs like, or symptoms, like extreme exhaustion or getting sick in certain ways, right? So what it's doing the most with these energies is that it's shifting our consciousness. And we are seeing different perspectives in life that we may not have seen or noticed before. We are in a quantum energy space. Everything is accelerated. The old world has kept us separate. We consider the ego and the higher self to be separated. The new world unites them. When they merge as in unity consciousness, the level of service is for the collective. The ego is still there, but transformed. I just had my first book published through Balboa and Hay House, and it provides a practical guidance on what I'm sharing here. So the book is called Cracking the Sacred Heart Code. It's a channeled alchemical formula and practical guidebook, which I will also be posting the information on my website. And it will be coming out on Amazon soon as well. 2024 has been an alchemical and transformative year. What I'm sensing from 2025 is that it will continue to dismantle the old world and new cosmic energies will polish more of our energies to start rebuilding the new world with new inspired ideas, connecting more to our soul. In the meantime, Let's distinguish the ego and the higher self for a moment. I will describe from the perspective of the old world way of looking at it. The shadow ego is more fear based. It has a tendency to go into extremes like too critical of self or too much pride, like being superior to others. So when you hear such terms as you have to, you must, then this is normally the egoic part. Sounds pushy and forceful. The higher self is gentler and softer. It will not give up giving you the same message. It is consistent, it is patient, and it will be suggestive and more of a guidance, knowing it is your own free will that still gets to decide on the outcome. When you hear it will be best, we suggest that it's coming from your higher self. However, sometimes we may not hear them as voices. Messages could come in other ways. They could also come in as certain impulses through your solar plexus. And sometimes when it feels so painful, like something is being too pushy, too aggressive, and you feel like there is this pain here in the solar plexus area of your stomach, feel like you feel the energy that is often associated to the ego. When it is your higher self that speaks, the intuition is also linked to our solar plexus area as well. But when it is your higher self, it will feel lighter, and it would also be bringing in your heart. And in your heart, it will feel that it is, the right path for you. So the key is continue to work on yourself. I mean, first get to know yourself well, all your abilities, and that is going deeper into your cosmic and galactic self that you may not necessarily yet be so aware of, but they are there. All your strengths and all your shadows. And if you need guidance on these methods, check out my latest book that I mentioned. It's a practical book. I will leave you with this channel message from the collective higher self, just an aspect of you. Beloved, we are always here in your presence, in the deepest aspect of your most sacred space of your soul. And we are always giving guidance. We love you, and in our eyes, you are magnificent. And you are perfect. And you're doing well for being here now. Always connect with us. Always know that we are here. And we are much closer than you realize. So make that time for your own sacredness to connect with us always. So that is the message from the collective higher self. Just feeling that in your heart. Let's conclude this episode with a quote from Carl Jung. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. So it is, all my love.